All right, and we are live. Great. Hey, everybody, this is Patrick Millikin from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and with another one of our virtual programs. And I'm actually really excited today. One of my favorite, fairly new writers, Caz Frear, is with us today, talking about her just terrific new book called Shed No Tears. Welcome, Caz. Great to see you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm getting used
Yeah,
to this online event world now.
I know it's a strange, strange world. Um, but it's actually been quite interesting. We've been doing a lot of these, obviously a lot of these virtual programs since I think we started doing them in March of last year. And one of the things that's really cool about this is there's an odd intimacy to them in a
Yeah,
way,
I know what you mean.
which is strange. I mean, we get as voyeurs, we get to see a little bit into Caz Frear's living space there, and
Well, it's kind of the best light I could get. I don't. Yeah, I hadn't really. I'm actually on my laptop, my desktop. I was on it for an event last night, and I just had this sort of ghostly hue, which kind of works for the crime genre. But yeah, I was like, right, I need to move where there is a little bit of light on me this time. So yeah, you've got my blinds, and you've got my half-wrapped Christmas presents, and
yeah. Well, it's funny because the conversations, sometimes they take on a slightly different tone depending
yeah.
upon, how the spirit moves us that day.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. We're not sat on a
so it's,
stool with a microphone. It just feels
yeah.
different. Yeah,
But, that being said, we do, of course, miss the energy and, of having the real audience. It's just a slightly different vibe to it.
yeah,
And so I think what we hope is that, going forward, once this craziness kind of subsides, as it will, um, that we have a combination of both.
yeah,
I think that, as I was starting to say, what's so neat about this is that it's forced us to kind of go outside of our normal way of thinking
yeah,
about events. And, for a lot of authors in the UK, I get to talk to you today where it might not have occurred to us before,
yeah,
you know.
yeah.
And then, had a great conversation with Denise Mina, a good friend,
Oh,
and Ian Rankin and people like that are in Europe and other
yeah,
places. So it's been awesome. Yesterday we had an event with Lars Kepler, the husband and
yeah,
wife from Stockholm. So
yeah.
it's very, very cool. But just to get a little housekeeping out of the way for everybody who's watching, um, this is the new book, Shed No Tears, and Kaz was kind enough to sign a bunch of book plates for us, and we still have some. So uh, we have those available. So please go to our website or give us a call, and we have copies for sale. Um, it's always so exciting to talk to a writer who's really on the rise. A really And Kaz and I met originally a couple of years ago when you were in America touring for the first book, Sweet Little Lies.
Yeah. I was probably
Which
still a bit rabbit in the headlights then.
now we had a great time. I think we talked about punk rock and all kinds of
Yeah,
shared
yeah,
fun time. Um, but you'll be pleased to know that I've been hand selling the hell out of this
oh,
paperback,
bless you.
getting people started. But just one of the things that impressed me so much about when I first read Sweet Little Lies right away was just the voice. You know, some people got it, some people don't, and you've really got it. That wonderful first person engaging, uh, relatable voice. Was that something that comes natural to you, or did you have to really work at it?
It came quite naturally to me. I sound really big-headed saying that now. Lots of other things don't come naturally to me, and I have to really work at them. But I think the voice definitely did. I mean, I remember reading, and I get comparisons, which blows my mind, but I remember reading In the Woods by Tana French for the first time and
Yeah,
having that sort of light bulb moment of, oh, you can write crime with a sort of a real personality behind it. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to have that sort of incredibly dry tone. And that's not to say that Tana French was the first, but it was that, the first person that I read that really made me think kind of that's how I want to write, or that, and
yeah,
it's not even trying to emulate her, but almost that's how I would write if I was going to write a novel. Um,
sure.
so the voice came to me quite easily. My husband always says when he reads my books, he always hears my voice.
Sure.
When he's reading Cat. So there's probably an element of that. And you mentioned writing in the first person. I think if you do write in the first person, your personality is always, particularly first person present tense, there's something about it that your personality will probably bleed into the narrative a little bit. But that's the challenge, to sort of rein that in, that I'm not necessarily giving Cat my opinions on things, because we're very different. Our life experiences are very different. She's quite a bit younger than me, so I don't necessarily want to give her that older perspective on life. It's kind of trying to look back and think, how was I emotionally at that age, even though, you know, she's had a far more dysfunctional upbringing than I had.
Right. And so I'm just trying to remember if I can do the math. I think there's a hint that she's right around 28 or 29. Is that where she is currently?
Yeah, she would be now. Yeah, she's 28. Yeah.
28. Okay, so I'm assuming that you have that kind of cheeky, you know, profane, lots of good swear words, salty vocabulary. Is that what you're known for?
Yeah, I would say so. It's
Yeah.
really difficult to judge it when you're writing as well, because I think, you know, sometimes I think the odd swear word helps, and it's
Absolutely.
realistic. And sometimes it's needed, particularly if that's the way that the character would talk.
Right.
But you know, you have to check sometimes that the way it sounds in your head when it's actually read on the page can perhaps come out sounding more aggressive than maybe you meant it. But yeah, that would be me. And I guess what I do have in common with Cat is I do have both my parents are Irish, so I come from that. A lot of, not so much Cat's voice, but other voices, other characters. I've kind of got that Irish lilt, the way, not the accent, but the way of speaking and the phrases and that sort of thing.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's funny, when I went to Ireland, I was there in 1999, you know, and I've always been, you know, really kind of taken with the literature of Ireland, and but I remember they hadn't gone to Euros yet there. And I remember getting a 10-pound or punt note, and it had James Joyce on it. And I'm like, you know, this is a country that has its priorities straight.
Yeah.
You know? Just the, you know, has just the celebration of its writing and culture. And you pick up a Sunday Dublin Times, and the amount of space that's devoted to literature and art is just incredible.
Yeah. And everyone's a storyteller that you meet there.
Yeah.
Everyone, you know, my dad, and he would admit this himself, reads my books and that's it. He's not a reader. Yeah, he's not really, but he is such a storyteller. It really is, you know, pull up a pew and sit down when he's telling. He used to work on the buildings, and you know, when he was younger, and he is a great storyteller. And sometimes you think, well, some of these stories I should write them down. And I think you get that with the Irish, and yeah, that definitely comes out in all the Cat Kinsella books, I think.
Yeah, I think you kind of touched on something that hadn't really occurred to me, but is so true, that it's a combination of it's not so much the destination, it's the getting there. That's a kind of a facile way of putting it, but you know, it's just it's how you tell the story, and you manage to combine, you know, a good page turning plot with it just seems like you're having fun on every page, you know, just, you know, in each scene, and putting these people in the real world talking with each other, and interesting things happen.
The editing stage, I'm always having fun. The first draft stage, it's misery. Relatively speaking, and you know, other writers would say something completely different. I think editing is when you really start to make it shine. The first draft is, yeah, quite difficult.
For your US publisher, they don't muck about with your Britishisms, do they?
No, not really. And that was Emily at Harper, my editor, had always sort of said, you know, we don't want to Americanize this book. We're sort
Right,
of launching you as a British author, and this is a British procedural. I would
right.
say in, you know, my books are relatively long, let's say 110,000 words. I'll maybe get 15 um, batted things batted back at me, where it's not that they're changing anything, it's just that word will mean absolutely nothing, and you know,
Yeah.
might take it out. It's normally brand names and that sort of thing. It's just, oh, should we just change it to this, it's a bit more universal. But in terms of idioms and just the
Yeah.
way people speak, yeah, it's never changed at all.
Well, I think there was a scene where, oh gosh, I think was it Steele maybe? She sits on the bonnet of a car, you
Yeah,
know, and I'm glad they didn't change that, you know,
yeah, yeah,
because
they changed
those
such
kind of
small.
details, those kind of
Yeah,
details, you know, at least for an American reader, that you know that's nice, I think, to read, you know, instead of changing it to the hood or
yeah,
whatever we'd call it here in the States. There
yeah.
was an interesting difference in Ian Rankin, where he actually had a title of one of his books that they changed for an American audience. It was called Flesh Market Close, you know, and they called it Flesh Market Alley here,
Right,
because
okay.
that word is completely close would be completely different, you know.
The
We
close
wouldn't,
isn't the road. It's not the
right,
name of the road in America. No. Okay. Yeah,
right,
it's stuff that you will get the occasional thing like that where, yeah, you're like, oh, I didn't realize that you guys didn't say that. I thought that was a universal thing. And but yeah, it's really just about changing the odd thing here and there. I think, you know, people know what you mean. And, you know, I find
sure.
it with American authors that I read, sometimes I think, well, I don't really know what that is, but I get the gist of what you're getting at. And it really,
Although Although when you get to Glasgow and read Denise Mina's books, occasionally it's like, what the hell are you talking about? And so she'll put in a glossary at the back that has some of those terms. God, what a brilliant writer she is.
yeah, I think I'd struggle with some of those terms, to be honest. So
Yeah.
yeah, a different dialect.
Well, let's get into this. For the readers that might not be familiar with your work yet, is there
Hmm.
like a basic kind of setup you can give, getting us up to this point, and then we can dig into Shed No Tears?
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, so Shed No Tears is the third in the series. And as you mentioned, Sweet Little Lies was the debut from a couple of years ago. And that introduced Kat Kinsella, and she's a young detective with the Metropolitan Police Force. And in that book, she starts to believe that her father might be involved in the murder that she's been assigned to. So a lot of that book is about the personal versus the professional, and she's estranged from her father. She doesn't really have a great relationship with her family at all, but it sort of looks at, do blood ties always win out in the end? So that was the first, Cat Kinsella, and then Stone Cold Heart came out a year later. And I won't spoil anything, but the events of Sweet Little Lies continue to haunt Cat as they start investigating a new case. And that was more focused on a husband and wife, a really, really toxic marriage. So I
Mm,
guess Sweet Little Lies was quite a family focused novel, I guess. This was honing in very much on a husband and wife relationship. I suppose a bit of a who do you believe setup. And
right.
then for Shed No Tears, I went down a completely different route, because I think with series, you have to make sure that each book, even though there will be things that you know readers really enjoy and you want to integrate, you need to make sure that each book is coming at things from a slightly different angle, which is why with
Mm,
Shed No Tears, I went more down the cold case route, because that was new for me. And I suppose more importantly, it was new for Kat as well. And it presents, she's quite junior in her career. So it was
right.
her first cold case. So it was, yeah, it was interesting just to write from a research point of view, but it was also interesting to write her as she, you know, a cold case has quite a different tempo to it. It's politically very different, because you're sort of treading on toes of officers who were involved in the previous case.
Right.
Um, and so yeah, totally. There is a serial killer. I was talking to somebody about Shed No Tears, and they were saying, oh, it's a serial killer novel. Like, well, it's not really. It's hard because I don't want to give anything away. I start saying something and then think, oh, maybe I shouldn't say
Well,
that.
and this is a book where we really can't give spoilers, because there are some definite
yeah,
spoilers.
yeah. But there is a serial killer sort of basis to it, but then it goes off in
Right.
very, very different directions.
Right. Well, as you say, you learn about the serial killer and the backstory at the very beginning of the book, and I think it's even on the jacket copy, so there's no big spoiler there.
No,
But
no.
but before we delve into that, can we talk about? I mean, all of your books have this really, I think, really well fleshed out cast of central core characters, the team, the team, and just for American viewers, let me just see if I understand some of the like DC, Cat Kinsella, that would be Detective Constable, is that right?
Yeah, so that's the most junior rank.
Right, and then her sort of mentor, who one of my favorite characters, Luigi Parnell, which is a fascinating mix of associations there with that name. He's DS, which would be what, Detective Sergeant, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
And then the boss, the wonderful mercurial, just femme fatale in some ways, DCI, and that would be Detective Chief Inspector, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, I got it right. Kate Steele. Can you talk a little bit about those three main players?
So Parnell is, I suppose, from an operational point of view, is Kat's boss and mentor, and she sort of refers to him as her work dad. And Parnell has 3 grown-up sons. He doesn't have any daughters, and it's just quite sort of, and they spend so much time together. It just seemed quite obvious that they've grown together. And he's a really warm, caring character. And because she has this awful relationship with her father, I sort of had this option of, right, do I give her some sort of daddy issues in terms of boyfriends, or do I sort of have her gravitating towards kind older men in her life? And I think that's what she's found in Parnell. And he's not quite on retirement, but he's in the twilight years of his career, so he's a great person for her to learn from as well, even though they're really, really different in approach. And then their boss is DCI Kate Steele, who is my favorite character to write, to be honest. I love her.
Really? Okay.
She's very slightly based on somebody I used to work, not directly for, but somebody that I was aware of in an office that I worked in. And she was, like that sort of teacher at school, that if you worked hard, they were lovely or they were supportive, but if you didn't, they were terrifying. But she was very much like somebody I used to work with, in that she's quite petite, quite feminine, sort of into fashion. She always looks the part, and you could be wrong in thinking things about Kate Steele, because she will absolutely wipe the floor with you, even though she's kind of this dinky femme fatale. Is quite interesting. I've never thought of her like that, but yeah, she is in some ways. And she steals every scene. She steals every scene that she's in as well. I have to really sort of think sometimes, do I give Kate that line? Is that a Kate line, or is that a Parnell line?
Right.
But yeah, I think because Kat is very much estranged from her own family, again, I had this option. Do I make her that sort of classic loner that you often see in crime fiction? Do I make her that loner who doesn't really form relationships very well? Or do I give her another family? And so I gave her another family in Steele and Parnell. And, I've lived in London for 14 years, and I'm back where I grew up now. But just from working in offices there, you do forge incredibly strong relationships, particularly if you're away from home, with the people that you work with. And I think particularly in that type of job, it's incredibly pressurized and emotional. And they are the unit. Parnell is definitely the surrogate father. Kate Steele is more maybe the big sister figure to her. But then there's a cast of the wider team as well, and they all kind of fight and bicker and fall out, and get each other. And
there's the wonderful, who may be my favorite, I'm not sure, the Ollie character, Karen.
Oh yeah.
He's kind of this wonderful grandfatherly maybe figure, in a way, dysfunctional way. And then there's another character in this book that Tess, is it Dyer?
Dyer,
the last name, excuse me. But some of the scenes with her and Kate have this real electricity to them. That must have been a lot of fun to write.
Yeah, it is, because I think you're so in the previous two books, you're so used to seeing Steele as she rules the roost, and she's the one that everybody looks up to, and she is, this kind of legend within her team and beyond. And then Tess Dyer sweeps in, and she's
the Valkyrie.
Yeah. She's I was going to say she's a little bit younger than Kate. I don't know if that is overly important. Maybe it is, because Kate is probably not too far off retirement. And they worked together years ago, and you can definitely see this tension. And they were both mentored by the same guy, Ollie Cairns, who you mentioned. So there's that sort of competitiveness. I didn't necessarily want to create these two women pitched against each other, and I don't think that's the way it comes off. But you can sort of see that there is this ruffling feather when the two of them are in the room.
And there is sort of a dance that they engage in when they're interacting with each other that was really fun to read. By the way, just to address the people that are watching on Facebook, I'm kind of flying solo here today. If you have questions for Caz, please don't hesitate to type them in. And a little bit closer to the end here, I will ask her as many as I can. We have a lot of nice people tuned in. Some comments already.
I'm an open book.
Yeah. Well, let's get into this book. So in Shed No Tears, as the book opens, a body is found, kind of dumped under these logs, and it relates to this cold case you were talking about, the woman Holly Kemp, who back in 2012, let me see if I can get this straight. In 2012, there was this serial killer at work, Christopher Masters, and he was kind of dubbed the roommate, or that the crimes were dubbed the roommate murders. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
And so 6 years previous to this book, which was 2012, he was apprehended, and this one last body was never found, but it was always attributed to him. Right? Okay.
Yeah.
And then he's killed in Nick, as it were. Would it be in Nick or in the Nick in the UK? Or neither?
No, it could probably be either. In Nick sounds like quite a slang way of saying it. I think that would work. I think criminals would probably call it that. Yeah. Okay.
Villains. I love that too. I love how in England criminals are referred to as villains. I don't know. There's something about that I love.
Again, I wouldn't have known that was quite a British thing. I wouldn't have known that at all. But villains is considered quite a British.
Is that still used, by the way?
Yeah, it is. It's probably, it's a little bit more old-fashioned, but it's still used, definitely.
I remember reading in a novel by the wonderful Derek Raymond. He referred to this kind of dodgy pub as a villain's incubator, which I thought was great, where all the villains hung out. But anyway, so Masters was killed in prison, so they can't go to him now. Can you just talk a little bit about, was this particular serial killer based upon a real one in the UK, or?
No, not really. it was, and I actually said serial killer earlier on. He's probably, and I think it's talked about in the book, he's probably more of what they call a spree killer than a serial killer.
Right.
In that he murdered several women across a very short time frame. And often with spree killers, when they do that, there is almost the sense of they know they'll be caught. So yeah, it wasn't so much based on, it wasn't based on this guy, but there was an awful case in the UK, a guy who was nicknamed by the media the Suffolk Strangler, which kind of cheapens what he did. And it's that classic, everybody knows the Suffolk Strangler. Could they name his victims? Probably not. But he killed a number of women over maybe a 2-month period. And then it dominated our screens for those 2 months. And then he was apprehended. And he hadn't gone to great lengths to really, truly hide what he was doing. And I think that's the difference with spree killing, as opposed to serial killers have this period of time in between each murder where they just go back to normal life or whatever is normal for them. So that's kind of what inspired it, but that's where the similarities end.
And so can you talk, I say there's a lot we can't talk about, but can you talk about sort of the basic setup, what happens after this body is discovered?
Yeah, so they initially believe that Holly Kemp is one of Christopher Masters' victims, and that's basically due to the fact that she was seen with Christopher Masters and then was never seen again. That was the last sighting of her, going into his house, and then she was never seen again. So, the sound assumption has always been that she was one of his victims. And like a lot of murderers, like a lot of narcissists, he would never say whether he did kill her or not. Sometimes he did, sometimes he didn't. He enjoyed toying with the police. So it's always assumed that she was one of his, but then when they actually, it was 6 years ago, obviously they're only finding her remains rather than her body, but there's clearly a lot that you can tell from that. They find out that the cause of death was different to the other 3 women that he killed. The location is different. So this was very much a London murder. The book opens with Kat and Parnell in a field in Cambridge, in rural Cambridgeshire. So again, there's this sort of, well, the 3 women were found together in a wood in London, why she ended up here. And there's just things that start to not necessarily add up. And as you say, they can't go to him and get any answers, not that he would have probably given them anyway. So they're tasked with reopening the investigation, not necessarily at that point because they think they got it wrong, but more the case of they need to be seen to be looking at other options. So yeah, that's kind of the springboard for them going back and looking into Holly Kemp's life a lot more, because that wasn't done 6 years ago. It was very much a case of, oh, well, she's one of the roommate's victims, and that's kind of where her story finished.
And there's a scene early on in the book where Kat and is it Parnell or is it Steele? I can't remember now. Where they go to the prison to speak with.
Oh, it's with Dyer.
It's with Dyer. Excuse me. Yeah, and they have to interview this, fellow inmate, who, claims to have that he heard. Obviously, he was with Masters and had all this inside information, et cetera. But the scene is interesting because they have to play not good cop, bad cop necessarily, but they have to negotiate this kind of interesting, employing different methods of getting the information out of this guy, who's never going to get out of prison. And for some of that kind of stuff, and this kind of gets into a more general question of police procedure and all those kind of details, to write a scene like that, and any of the procedural scene book, who do you go to for some of that information, or what are your sources?
Yeah, well, I have a great source, but actually, interestingly enough, for that scene, when I spoke to him, and he's a very experienced police officer, he said, I've never been into a prison to interview anyone. It's just not something that's been part of any case that I've worked on, that I've had to do that. So he could steer me a little bit, but I think a lot more of it was based on reading articles from detectives that have, and TV, if I'm really honest.
Sure.
I love writing interview scenes, so it doesn't necessarily the sort of the push and shove, the game playing, the tension doesn't concern me, but just getting a feel for what the prison might be like, that was probably more a challenge. Although I did go and do a reading in a prison not too long before I started writing the book, so I could at least visualize a little bit about and the sounds, and I had a bit of a sense there. But generally, yeah, I work with an amazing police officer who I contacted way back to say, would you mind answering a few questions? And a few questions has turned into daily badgering, basically. And not, it is kind of about procedure, but it's more about authenticity, I think. Is this what happens in a squad room? Would particularly sometimes the way that Kat, bearing in mind she is incredibly junior, and yes, she does have this tight relationship with Steele, but sometimes, I've written a line and I think, would a low-ranking officer really talk to a detective chief inspector like that? Probably not. I need to go and check. All those kind of things are quite important to me. The authenticity is really important, more than the actual procedure to a degree, because if you wrote a book that followed the procedure to the letter, it would be A, incredibly dull, and B, very long. So it's more the feel of being in a station and how people relate to each other, and would that rank speak to that rank like that, and all those kind of things.
Yeah, it seems like if you were doing a realistic book, it would be like, and so Kat sat behind the computer for the next 5 hours and did her paperwork and
Yeah,
things like
exactly.
details like that.
Yeah.
Although it's funny you mention that, because there is a point quite early in the book where she makes the point of saying like, oh, shut up, to one of her higher ups. And she makes the point of, at some point and on some level, rank kind of dissolves in a way and you're able to, just communicate as peers to a
Yeah.
certain degree. And then
Yeah.
that closes back up. Yeah.
Yeah, she's been in that team basically since she graduated into detective school, I guess. So they are a bit of a family to a degree. And again, I can sort of relate to that. And she goes on to have, thoughts about her professional life and where she's going with that in the book. And that was definitely a little bit autobiographical. When I first moved to London, I worked for one firm for 7 years. And I loved it, and I loved it as much the day I left as the day I joined. But I was always that 21-year-old, kind of first into the bar, last out, always hungover, even though I wasn't by the time I'd left. You're always kind of the young one in the office.
Right.
And I think Kat's starting to feel that. Does she need to go somewhere else and be the slightly more grown-up version of herself?
Yeah. I'm getting a few comments here. Yeah, if you're just joining us, folks, we are talking to the great Caz Frear. This is her new book called Shed No, get my fingers out of the way, Shed No Tears. So there you have it. You alluded to, one of the dynamics in play in all three of the books, and there's a kind of an overarching story in the background that you kind of keep doling out a little bit more information as we go, which is about juggling her own career in law enforcement against her kind of dodgy, dysfunctional family, particularly her father, who has ties to the criminal world, let's say, putting it mildly. Can you talk a little bit about how that dynamic kind of functions, and do you have sort of an end game where all will be revealed.
No, is the answer. I have thoughts about where it will go, and it's a difficult one because it's a great arc, but then you don't necessarily want her having the same sort of issues in every single book. It
Right.
needs to evolve a little bit, and it has evolved a little bit. When you meet her in Sweet Little Lies, she's barely talking to her father. They just haven't had a relationship. They communicate ever so every now and again between through her sister, who again she doesn't have a brilliant relationship with, but it's very, very fraught. By the time we've got to Shed No Tears, they are back on speaking terms again. It's all a little bit tense, and I can't go into things that happen in Stone Cold Heart because that would spoil things, but they sort of have an uneasy truce, I guess, by Shed No Tears. But if Kat, as we said, Kat, she's only 27. If she's going to stay in the police force for the rest of her career, then she's going to have to pick a side at some point, and it's just working out exactly what that side is going to be.
Can we talk at all
about that
which,
out?
I wish maybe I could chat you. Should we talk about this? Can we talk a little bit about her boyfriend in this book, or would you prefer to kind of leave that, let the reader just...
No, happy to.
Let's talk about Aiden.
Aiden is so he arrives in Sweet Little Lies, and he's actually the brother of the murder victim. So there's a couple of issues there, in that it's not against the rules, but it's not entirely ethical that you take up with a family member of one of your victims. And there are, there's other issues related to her dad knowing the murder victim, his sister. It's all very entwined. But he grows as the series goes on, and it's an interesting one because I've read series before where I think some do it really well, and then other times I've had that frustration of, does there have to be a love interest? And I think with Kat, it shows a slightly different side to her, which is good. And also, I mean, I've quite deliberately in Shed No Tears, there's a scene, and it is important in the overall plot of the book, but there's a scene where she's out with Aiden and his friends, and it's probably the first time you've ever seen her in a group of people her own age. A lot of the time, she spends an awful lot of time she'd go to the pub with Parnell every night rather than someone her own age. And the same with Steele. So I really wanted to show her in that setting that she is, to all intents and purposes, a normal girl in her mid to late 20s. But yeah, you sometimes think, does there need to be a love interest? But I guess he's more than that. He's kind of, I'm going to say a millstone. That's probably not the nicest way to put it, but he complicates her life, basically, because she's keeping secrets from him. She's keeping him secret from certain people in her life as well. So it all adds to the tension rather than just gives us a nice kind of cat having a cuddle on the sofa at the end of the day. Nice scene.
Exactly.
Most of their scenes together has friction.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, there are readers and people that are watching. We can't really say much more about this book because there's so much. There's a lot of really interesting surprises and twists in this book. So don't skip to the end and read the end.
Somebody asked me the other day, was there any particular book or TV show or anything that inspired the book? And I was thinking, well, there is, but if I tell you, you'll basically you'll know which path we end up going down. So yeah. I don't know why. I don't remember with Sweet Little Lies and Stone Cold Heart feeling like I had to kind of put my fist in my mouth so much, because there must be things within those books that it was difficult to talk about without giving away. But I think here, it's not so much twists in the sense of, you know, the classic twist, curveball twist. But
Right.
I think the book probably ends up going in a direction that maybe you're certainly not supposed to think it will go.
Right. Absolutely. Um, just to kind of go back, and then I'll open up to some of these questions I'm getting. Going back to when you first started writing, why crime? Had you always been a reader of crime fiction, or was that something that that you did you always write that in that genre, or did you do other sorts of fiction?
Um, Pretty much. Many moons ago, and there was a huge gap before I actually started writing crime, I wrote a novel that I suppose was more in the women's fiction side, which got an agent but didn't end up getting picked up, which was clearly devastating at the time, but one of those classic everything happens for a reason. But actually, when it didn't get picked up, the agent came back to me and sort of said, okay, well, we had lots of great feedback, and there were a couple of, if she writes something else, we'd love to see it. So what's your next idea for women's fiction? And I didn't have one. I just had this one idea that I'd got out into 100,000 words, and I really didn't have one. And that was when I confessed that I read women's fiction, but I wasn't hoovering it up, I suppose. Crime was always what I'd read since I was a child, really. I was always stealing my mum's Agatha Christie's, and particularly in my teens, I got really into Linda LaPlante. Her American series was kind of one of my favorites. And so that was always what I was reading. But I think particularly on the procedural side, I had that sense of, well, I don't know anyone in the police. I've never even set foot inside a police station. Yes, I've watched lots of telly. Yes, I've read lots of novels. I understand sort of the mechanics of the genre, but who am I to start writing about a police detective? So it kind of took me a while to get over that, really. And yeah, the rest is history, as they say. But why crime is a tricky one. Why crime? I suppose it's just what I love and what I read. And I think I like the fact that you're always being challenged to think and try and work things out for yourself. I mean, I've probably read so much now, and particularly writing, I spoil reading experience for myself. My husband says I really spoil watching TV detective shows for him, because I'm constantly sort of saying, there's a reason that guy keeps turning up, and I can spot red herrings coming. But I love when there is a bit of a curveball or something that I didn't see coming. And I think that's what I always try to do with my novels, is challenge the reader and surprise them, but at the end of the book, for you to be able to think, aha, I can see how that happened. This hasn't completely I can see where you were dropping those breadcrumbs. And that's really satisfying. And that's probably, why I ended up going down this route, working out the puzzle, I guess.
Well, also, if you're writing about police, your characters are constantly involved with people that are in crisis and in conflict, and in extreme trauma, which is obviously interesting to read about. Yeah. And also, do you find that some of the things that maybe scare you, kind of work themselves out on the page in a way?
Yeah, I think I've never sort of written and felt scared as such by something I've written. And only because I'm not necessarily into gore and really sort of spending an awful lot of time going into a crime scene, and I will skate over it, I will nod to it. But sort of the actual scenes of murder, or the horror side of it, I guess, I'm not necessarily, it's not my strength, and it's probably, I don't think it's always necessary. Some people do it really well, but I don't think it's necessary. But I do find I get quite emotional from what I write. I mean, certainly with this novel, with Holly Kemp, she is, you know, what we would call quite an unlikable victim to a degree, until you really start reading about her past and what she's been through. And I think those are the things that I kind of, yeah, I want to scare the reader, but I think I'm a bit more of a tug on the emotions kind of crime writer than a.
Well, it's funny. That's actually kind of what I meant. I wasn't really thinking about in terms of horror or gore, but I was thinking more about, you know, we all have these sort of primal fears of, you know, losing the people that we love, or, you
Yeah,
know, and in there are these heartbreaking stories that police officers witness every day of having to go notify the next of kin
yeah,
that their, you know, that their beloved husband or whatever has been killed.
yeah,
And you know, some of those things, you know, in crime fiction at its best, uh, you really get a sense of real people and loss, and you
yeah,
know, the reverberation of crime, not
yeah,
just, you know, how it affects people's lives and continues to over generations.
yeah.
Yeah.
And you know how it affects the police detectives' lives as well
Mm.
is really important. I mean, it's a fascinating job, but like you say, they call, what do they call it, the death knock, having to go and tell somebody. I mean, I can't even think about it, how you go about that.
Right.
It obviously it takes a certain type of personality, and like you say, you need to be supportive to that person that is mourning the loss of their wife or whoever, but
Child.
you also have to be thinking, well, was it you? You know,
Yeah.
everyone's.
Right.
um,
Absolutely.
so yeah, they are really fun to write about, and that's why I was saying, you know, the procedure part needs to be there as a backbone to the novel, but it's actually the psychology of why would you become a detective, what attributes do you have to have, how long are you in that role before it starts to take its toll. I mean, I think you can sort of see Parnell is a little bit jaded by, not that he's stopped feeling, but you can just, he's been around the block a little bit more, as has Kate Steele, but hers comes out in anger, where I think the sense of loss has probably got to Parnell probably a little bit more.
Right.
But
And he's
yeah, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, in Parnell in this scene, I think, isn't it his, he has 4 sons, and his oldest son is about to get married, and he's getting all weepy about it. And
Showing everyone
case,
pictures of the cake.
yeah, so he has a soft, vulnerable side as well.
Yeah.
Um,
And I kind of wanted to do that again as the opposite of Cat, I suppose, to show that they are real people, and you know, the classic detective with the dysfunctional home life and the 3 ex-wives and, you know, the bottle of whiskey and the desk drawer is, you know, it's been done and it's done brilliantly, but you know, Parnell has sons and a wife, and he's puppy training, and you know,
that's
he's like a normal guy who just
that's
happens
got
to
to
be
be,
a detective.
yeah, that's got to be a kind of an interesting challenge as a writer, I would imagine, is that, you know, there are these elements of, you know, detectives that some of them seem to come out of central casting, you
Yeah.
know, but some of those stereotypes are there for a reason, you
Oh,
know.
absolutely. Yeah.
And so I think finding a balance between not, you know, not overdoing what we've already seen a million times,
Yeah.
and making it a real human being, that's got
Yeah.
to be a tricky one. I think you've really succeeded brilliantly with these characters.
Thank you.
And so everybody seems to be fascinated, but they're not asking us many questions here. A few of them, let's see. One of them is simply, we talked a little bit before we got started live, was what's next for you? I know, do you have a 4th book in the series coming?
Well, I'm writing a standalone next. So yeah, I'm kind of working through that at the moment. So yeah, Cat is getting a rest for again. I shouldn't really say because it might give away something. But yeah,
Taking a
she's taking.
breather.
Yeah, she's taking a well-earned rest, shall we say. And yeah, I'm writing this standalone novel, which you know, it's very different. It's multi-narrative. Yeah, so it's from several different perspectives. The main protagonist is someone quite a bit older. It's not a detective story. It's been refreshing to write something different, but the tone is probably similar. I think if you like the general tone of the Cat Kinsella series, you'll certainly find that the kind of dry humour is there. But yeah, that's what I'm working on at the moment.
Now, are these, you mentioned different points of view. Is there one that's a first person, or are they all third person points of view?
There's one first person and the rest are third person, which is, some people find first person incredibly hard to write, whereas that is just naturally what falls out of me. So writing in third person it took a little while to get used to, because I felt a little bit detached from the characters when I'm sort of doing more of this all-seeing eye. But yeah, I'm enjoying doing something completely different. But it's weird, you know, Cat, and particularly Cat and Parnell and Steele, their voices are in my head all the time. I'll hear somebody say something and I think, oh, Kate Steele would so say that. How can I work that in? You know, if you write the same characters, I'm only 3 books in. I mean, gosh, someone like Ian Rankin, can you imagine? But if you're writing those characters, it's strange to put them to bed, but I think it is quite a good thing to do as well. It challenges you in different ways as a writer.
So you just sent him to the pub for a year?
Yeah, that we'll leave it at that. We won't say any more than
that. What can you tell us about the standalone?
Yeah, so it's about, gosh, I haven't kind of worked out the spiel, so I'll just tell you what it's about. So it's about a woman who kind of believes that she's very much one of life's good people, and she, you know, she's always there to offer lifts to people and doing bake sales and charity runs, and she's a tutor, a private tutor, but she does a lot of work for free with disadvantage. She's just one of life's good people.
Very suspicious.
Yes, well, but then she starts to realize that somebody in her very close circle is slowly dismantling her life and has a massive grudge against her. But because she's this amazing person, she genuinely doesn't know why somebody would be doing this. So the book's called, well, the working title is 5 Bad Deeds. It could well change, but she then has to revisit 5 incidents from her past where she could have inadvertently upset somebody. And it's kind of, I keep thinking of it's almost like the opposite of It's a Wonderful Life. It's sort of looking at how, you know, the small things you do and the decisions that you make that you don't necessarily mean to harm anyone else can have catastrophic consequences for other people. So the other narratives are these people in her circle who they all interact in scenes and they all love her and get on, but each person has something against her for reasons that she's never known.
I kind of like it. I kind of like it's sort of the reverse of, you know, that tired old trope that you'll never know all the people that you've positively affected throughout your life. You know, it's almost like you'll never know how many people you've, you know, fucking hurt, you know.
Yeah, and that's it. And it's, you know, you don't necessarily mean to, but we all, you know, we all make decisions that can inadvertently hurt people. We all make selfish decisions where we, you know, we absolutely know we're putting ourselves first, and that can have a knock-on impact. So there's no, and I think I can say this without any sort of spoiler, there's no real there's no real part where you're suddenly going to find out that she murdered someone 15 years ago. They are in some ways small incidents, but they had dramatic effects on people's lives. That's her just going back. So it's told partly in the past as she's looking back. So yeah, I need to work on sharpening that blur, but that's essentially what it is. But I like that. It's the opposite of that. You never know how you positively affected someone.
Right.
You never know the damage you've done.
Exactly. That's a good tagline.
Yeah.
For the,
Yeah.
well, it's funny, as we were talking here, Barbara Peters, the owner of the store,
Yeah.
she sent me a text and said that that you guys have worked out, so you're going to be hosting and speaking with debut author coming
Yes.
up in February.
Yeah, Abigail Dean, Girl A, which I've just, well, I say I just read, but I read a few weeks ago. I've finished. Have you read that one?
No, I haven't. Is it good?
Yeah, really, really good. It's just it feels incredibly fresh, and obviously it is crime, but it's not crime in the sense of murder, or it could very well be sort of literary fiction. I think it's being compared with, I mean, the plot isn't the same, but it's that kind of, we need to talk about Kevin kind of, what do they call it, water cooler type novels. But the thing for me with that, and I'll obviously talk to Barbara about this before we meet with Abigail, but just the writing I thought was incredible. Really clean, just nails what she wants you to see. Very, very sharp. It's not sort of pages of beautiful prose. It's just she just a turn of phrase, a small detail, and you're rooted in the scene straight away.
So you don't get the sense of the author intruding into the writing.
No.
Yeah. Well, we should probably sign off here in a minute, but what else are you reading that you've really liked recently during this whole pandemic time? Have you been able to do some reading?
Yeah, I have. And I was talking to someone about this. I've almost read so much over the pandemic. I get a bit flustered when people say, what have you been reading? Because I've read so much. And I'm so grateful for that, because I know a lot of people, well, certainly I know a lot of authors whose writing mojo suffered, but also reading mojo. My writing suffered for the first few months, definitely. We were all just scrolling newsfeed constantly. But I found that I really could read. I could go into somebody else's world and stay there. So yeah, I've done so much reading. So what have I been reading lately? So I mentioned Girl A. There's a book out early next year, Greenwich Park, that's a debut by a lady called Catherine Faulkner. A great Oxford University set thriller called Magpie Lane. You aware of that one?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, it's fantastic. Fabulous.
I think we have that here. I'm not sure. I have to check.
Yeah, I'd really, really recommend it. I got round to reading The Party by Elizabeth Day. Have you read that one?
No.
No, that was fantastic. I can see my books from here, and I'm thinking the new one by CJ Tudor, because I get sent so many proofs. A lot of the time I'll recommend books and then I think, oh no, sorry, it's not out till next June. I forget.
Do you get hit up for blurbs quite a bit now?
Yeah, in a sort of soft sense. You don't get people chasing you for them, but I guess they're sending you a proof for a reason.
You will soon.
Yeah. I do. They come in fits and starts. I got quite a lot at the beginning of the pandemic, and then not so many, and now I'm starting to see more coming through. But it's always a challenge, because you definitely, I want to be reading books that are coming out next year and having opinions on them. But then sometimes you think, gosh, I can't remember the last time I actually kind of read, not what I wanted, because I want to read these new novels coming through, but I can't remember the last time I actually kind of really selected what I was going to read.
Right.
And Magpie Lane was one of those, which is, probably why I enjoyed it so much. But yeah, I've just been flying through. I got round to reading, was Our House by Louise Candlish. Was that?
Don't know it.
it won British Book of the Year over here. So it was, yeah, that was fantastic. But yeah, so many books this year, probably averaging 2 a week, I would say, which for me is, it's pretty good.
It's funny. It's been for it being the crazy year that it's been. I think it's been a remarkable year for books.
Yeah.
In terms of what's come out. I mean, just so many great books have come out this year.
Yeah. Such a tough year, especially for a debut to be launched. Really, really tough.
Yes and no, because sometimes it's like, if they sent somebody out on the road, as we were talking about at the beginning, these virtual events we're finding have a much longer tail. And whereas if you were here in person, we might have 40 or 50 people, but then, people will catch up to this hopefully, and you can have thousands of people all over the world that are becoming aware of your work that way. So it's interesting. Yeah. Well, crikey, thanks so much for spending this hour with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the invite.
Yeah. Everybody, you need to buy this book. And the holidays are almost here. It makes a great gift.
Beautiful as well. Beautiful cover.
Yes, it is gorgeous. Yeah. All right, Caz. Well, again, thanks so much. And thanks everybody for tuning in with us today. And let's keep in touch.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Patrick. Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.